Well, it kind of bothers me a tiny little bit that I don't really understand the whole law thing. Though I still may not understand it after I try, because even the BU I kind of understand a little bit, but not like understand. So maybe with this, I don't know. But I'm gonna watch the bookish theories on the album that I just released. You can just check it on my channel. I listened to the whole album, their debut album. So this is an Happened Potter Day 1. Explored Shakespeare references explained. Plus, me and Shakespeare don't really.
Hello and welcome back to Bookish Theories.
Bookish Theories.
In today's video, we'd like to talk about an Ivan's Porter Day 1, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of all the Shakespeare references that they included, how they fit with the concept as a whole, and what they can tell us about the upcoming comeback. Now, since Border Carnival is around the corner, I decided to take this opportunity to dive a bit deeper into an Ivan's debut and talk about how the concept was inspired by some works by William Shakespeare. This is a topic that was already discussed on Weavers magazine in a great article that I'm gonna be referencing throughout this video. But since Intro the Invitation included some Shakespeare poetry as well, today I want to take a look at all the references that they included in the first album to help us understand what we can expect from the next. If after this video you want to know more about the way Shakespeare is involved in Intro the Invitation, that video is already up and it also includes some theories about the concept photos. So without further ado, let's dive right in and see what's going on. Now, in the article that was posted on Weavers, the author mainly talked about 3 sources in relation to 3 different songs. We have Sonnet 11 referenced in Intro Walk the Line, Sonnet 148 linked to
I've read this one.
Taken,
What
and
do I
last but
remember?
not
Not
least
much.
we have none other than Hamlet, which is one of Shakespeare's most famous
I know
tragedies
this
that was
book.
referenced in both Given
We
and
did it at
Taken
school.
and Outro Across the
Similar
Line.
to Sonnet.
Now,
Do I
Sonnet
remember
11
much?
is a poem that fittingly belongs to a series of sonnets that is usually referred to as the Fair Youth sequence. This is a group of 126 poems that Shakespeare addressed to a handsome young man that the poet loved and admired very much. But the specific subject of the 11th sonnet actually revolves around his beauty as well as his need to have children in order to pass on this beauty before it fades away. Now, at first glance, the subject of this poem has very little to do with an Ivan, because in the story the boys are not having any children and nobody's actually encouraging them to have them. But as a matter of fact, this poem is a very fitting addition to the concept because, like our story, the sonnet reflects on the themes of youth, beauty and eternity. You see, in the poem, Shakespeare reflects on the ways in which the boy's beauty can become eternal. Even if his youth and fairness are meant to wither and die at some point, the poet sees his beauty as something so perfect that it needs to be preserved long after the natural course of the events. So if on the one hand he encourages the boy to procreate in order to make a copy of himself that will outlive the original, on the other, Shakespeare himself uses his poetry as a medium through which he can make the boy eternal with his own art. Now, as we also saw in Intro the Invitation, the idea that art can be a medium of eternity here is actually at the core of an Ivan's concept, because when the boys cross the border and wake up on day 1, their idol persona is a copy
Wake
of
up in
the
day
original that
one.
will outlive them because of their art. Through their music,
Oh, from
an Ivan
training to
will
artist?
literally transcend time and space and become eternal. They have the potential to be young forever, and their beauty will stay the same because the impact of their art will last longer than the life of a normal person. So it's no surprise that in the story we see that in this new world the boys become vampires, because in contrast to the boy, who will grow old and eventually die, a vampire is timeless, eternally beautiful and forever young. Just like in the poem Nature carved the young man on her seal of wisdom, beauty and increase, the intro tells us that the world carved an Ivan on the line that they are walking. But as the article rightfully points out, the song also tells us that while they walk, the boys also intend to carve the sunrise burning bright across the world. And this is important because what these lines are telling us here is that the boys intend to take action in order to fulfill their dreams. You see, in contrast to the boy in the poem, who is passively carved by nature and doesn't take any step to preserve his beauty, an Ivan actually takes Shakespeare's advice and create a copy of themselves that is the result of their journey to accomplish their dreams. So when they escape the woods and wake up on day 1, the boys not only rely on what was given to them by nature, but also seek to take their destiny into their hands and carve the sun like the world carved them. This is essentially what Given and Taken is all about. It's about acknowledging what was given to them, but also take this advantage and use it to fight for what they're longing for. So it's no surprise that in the intro their goal to carve the sun is so ambitious, because in order to withstand the test of time and become eternal, the boys have to put in as much effort in shaping their dreams as the world did in order to create them in the first place. As Shakespeare says in the poem, in order to create the fresh blood that they can call their own, an hyphen have to use what was given to them and essentially put it into practice. From being created, they have to become the creator, so as we saw back in Let Me In, the boys' journey actually begins with them crossing this border and transitioning from being human-like statues to fully active human beings. From being carved like sculptures, an hyphen are now in the position of carving the light that they want to put out in the world. But even if the sun is a symbol of this new beginning, it's also a potential threat that they have to overcome. As the article says, the sun can be seen as a representation of their new world, but since in the story the boys are vampires, this light can also be a source of danger, because the sun kills vampires and it's their greatest weakness. This means that their ambition to carve this new world might also be the source of their downfall, and this idea brings us to Sonnet 148, which, in contrast to the previous one, actually belongs to the Dark Lady sequence. Now, the Dark Lady sequence is a series of sonnets that comes right after the Fair Youth sequence and actually deals with the boy's affair with a woman that Shakespeare doesn't like. This is a lady that embodies all the attributes that people back in the day hated seeing in a woman. She is cunning, morally ambivalent, sexually active, and her affair with the boy obviously leads him towards a very dark path that is the exact opposite of what the poet actually intended for him. You see, in contrast to the Fair Youth sequence, which talked about the ideal and innocent beauty of the boy, the Dark Lady sequence focuses on the corruption of this beauty through temptation, and in the sonnet, this idea is portrayed by talking about the way the boy's love is blinding his judgment as well as the judgment of Shakespeare himself. You see, because of this woman, the innocent love that was portrayed before gets distorted to the point that love itself becomes an enemy that they have to overcome. And this sudden change of perspective can also be found in Given and Taken, because the new world that welcomes the boys on day one is also a reality where their very dream can actually turn on them. Just like in the poem, people are blinded by love, and even the sun cannot see until the sky gets clear. In Given and Taken, an hyphen are blinded and burnt by the light of this new sun. But just like in the sonnet, the song also tells us that this blindness doesn't stop them from diving deeper into this ambition, because despite of their struggles, the boys still want to follow their dreams and continue their journey across the border. Now, even if the article just focuses on this comparison, I actually think that another interesting parallel can also be found in the way both works talk about the theme of sight in connection to lies. Much like the boy in the sonnets, an hyphen undergo a transformation that is obviously triggered by love. In both cases they are blinded by it, and in both cases they welcome this transition because they are overcome by its power. But if in the sonnet this love is a source of lies that hides the truth, in Given and Taken this journey actually reveals them a truth about themselves. If you look closely, when the boys dive into the red sun to follow their dreams, the song also tells us that this is not a lie, but rather a transformation that enlightens them as they wander in the woods of questions. This is a process that essentially reveals them a new side of themselves, so as a voice calls them from the other side, their eyes become red like the sun, because even if this transition turns their world upside down, it's also a transformation that they have to endure for the vampire to come to the surface. In contrast to the sonnet, where the boy's love blinds him and pulls him away from his true purpose, the song tells us that the blinding light that burns an hyphen is a source of truth that brings them closer to their dreams. But in order to claim the crown and take the throne, the boys have to prove themselves and use both what is given and what is taken.
And they are proving themselves.
This finally brings us to Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is a tragedy in 5 acts that is referenced in both Given and Taken and Outro Cross the Line. Now, since this play is about a prince who goes insane as he tries to avenge the death of his father, once again the plot itself has very little to do with the hyphen story, but just like what we saw in the sonnets, the tragedy is a very fitting addition because of the general themes that it brings to the table. As the article rightfully points out, the core message of Given and Taken is all about the boys questioning their role in the new world that they found themselves in. Between acknowledging what was given to them and understanding what needs to be taken, it's also time for the boys to prove themselves and decide which side of the border they actually stand on. So this inner dilemma is fittingly expressed with a reference to be or not to be, which is a famous soliloquy that
To be or
Hamlet
not to
has in
be?
the first
To be?
scene of the third
He was
act.
losing his mind.
Now in the tragedy, this soliloquy is essentially about
Oh,
Hamlet choosing between life
yeah.
and death. In the speech, he questions whether it would be better to live and suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to fight against the troubles at sea and therefore end them with death. And even if in the story Hamlet would rather die and end it there and then, he eventually decides to live because nobody knows what happens after death and no traveler ever returned from the undiscovered country of the afterlife. As he says himself in the play, his decision is made out of cowardice. He chooses life not because he wants to live, but because he's scared of death. But in Given and Taken, this concept is once again turned upside down, because while in the story the boys do cross the border to a new world, they do so not to choose death, but rather to advance to a new stage of their life. Even if this process does indeed involve the death of the human boy, we can say that in the Knife and story, the choice is not between life and death, but rather between having a normal life and the prospect of eternity. So as the rice turns red and the vampire is awakened, the boys stand under a rain of fate's arrows. What this line tells us here is that much like Hamlet, Ivan choose to suffer the arrows of outrageous fortune, but their choice is not made out of cowardice, but out of bravery. And this is because instead of passively enduring their destiny, they actively choose to pursue it, even if they don't know what this journey will actually entail. Now, this sense of uncertainty is also portrayed in Outro Cross the Line, which is a song that explores the boys finally crossing the border and that actually references two different parts of the play. In the article, for instance, the author rightfully points out that the Knife's journey is compared to the journey of Laertes to France. In the third scene of Act 1, Laertes' father Polonius sends him a letter where he essentially gives him a series of advice that can help him as he embarks on this new stage of his life. So right off the bat, the comparison is pretty evident because, much like Laertes, and Ivan are living for a new reality that they know nothing about. In the play, Polonius tells him to be friendly, but also to beware of people who exploit the kindness of others. He encourages him to spend money on his appearance to make a good impression, but also not to lend money to other people. He tells him to hold on to his true friends, but also not to pick fights with people he disagrees with. So as you can see, all these suggestions are still valuable to this day. The most important advice that he ends up giving him, however, is to be true to himself, because a person who is true to themselves cannot be false to any man. Sure enough, this is exactly the passage that is mentioned in the outro, and this is important because what this reference tells us here is that in order to succeed in their journey, an Ivan have to be true to themselves, because that's the only way to be honest with others. Now, since for now their journey focuses on them getting to know a new side of themselves, this reference might also imply that if they want to achieve their goals, the boys need to face their vampire side and accept it as part of their new self. But this task is easier said than done, not only because in the story the vampire is portrayed as a very mysterious figure that calls them from the other side, but also because the journey itself is still full of doubts and uncertainty. Now, this idea is explored once again with a reference to be or not to be, because after the outro quotes the Polonius speech, the song also makes a reference to a very important line of Hamlet's speech. As I mentioned earlier, in the story Hamlet chooses life because he doesn't know what happens after death, and in his lines he expresses this concept by wondering what dreams may come in that sleep of death. In the outro, on the other hand, the boys are waiting for the sun to rise again and question what days may come when they wake up from this dreamless sleep. So even if the boys hope that their new day will begin like a dream, at this point of their journey, the boys still don't know. Even if they hope that they will achieve their dreams, their quest has just begun and nobody knows how their journey will actually play out. But judging by the carnival concept that they have going on, one thing that I can tell you is that in the story their desire to turn their dreams into reality might actually be much more than just a metaphor. You see, much like the carnival, the dream is a world where everything can happen. Up becomes down, down becomes up, life is mixed with death, and fantasy and reality become one, the reflection of the other. So as we saw in the new concept films, dreams are already starting to turn real because the boys have crossed the border and now everything is mixed together. If in the videos this concept was portrayed by showing the boys getting intoxicated in order to get access to the fantasy world of their imagination, however, if we follow what Shakespeare has to say about it, this new stage of their journey might actually portray both the ups and the downs of crossing the border. You see, in his works, Shakespeare uses dream as a medium to achieve self-awareness. This is his final goal, and it's a goal that is also shared by Athens concept as a whole. But in doing so, Shakespeare uses the dream both to show the beauty of people's imagination as well as the greatest fears hidden inside of people's hearts. This means that if an Athens concept will continue to follow the path laid out by Shakespeare, their carnival will be a dreamlike reality which is full of beauty but also full of horrors. But for now, we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Can I add to that? No. I understand a lot more now, but at the same time I understood and kind of lost some information, but this was an insight, so yeah, it's kind of genius when I think about it. That's it for this one. Thank you for watching. Bye.